I keep on feeling like the definitions and categories we get from the mainstream media are totally wrong, and they're getting it from academia. Academia has lost their mind. They no longer know. They don't do any kind of logic anymore. It seems like it's like. So I don't think these words. I don't think these words mean what you. This is this is the reaction you get when you listen to these people.
He didn't fall. Inconceivable. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Am I the only one that I get that feeling all the time? It's like you're using this word. It doesn't. I don't think it means what you think it means. So let's, for example, we've got the classic, the fascist term. So we've got the fascist term. We've got like the, I guess, Christian constitutional Bill of Rights believing, I guess, a conservative term that's out there these days. You've got kind of the classic hippie term. I've got some animation on these two. And then you've got the like younger crowd, which is, they label loosely anti-fascist. So they're like anti-fascist seems to be some of the current labeling that we seem to kind of see around. Now, if I do a quick search on these, I'm not a smart man, Janae, but I feel like if I was just to look at these two on the end look similar. I wouldn't ask them for a favor if I needed like a place to sleep or something. That would, I would probably go to ones in the middle. So so this is where it gets confusing, because like it seems like the mainstream media is saying like these two are like the same, almost equivalent, but then this guy is kind of similar to just a fun-loving like hippie person kind of thing. Seems to be and that seems to be kind of like the narrative you get. But if I was to just superficially look at it, I'd be like, I would stay away from these two guys at all costs for the most part. If I was injured, if I had like a lame foot or something like that, then I would make sure to steer clear, because so then I'd probably ask for help. That's what, just from the looks at it. Okay. So that's, and then you also have then the category of like the old school what's the word I'm looking for here? Like the Martin Luther King type. But you'll notice that the left kind of removed the Martin Luther King type, and they've replaced it with more like, I guess, this kind of thing, anti-fascist language. And so they kind of removed the language, and I think obviously the point of that is that these two seem pretty close together. So we'll kind of try to put that in there as well as the kind of like the stereotypes that are being kind of presented to us by the mainstream media. But I think it's kind of a problem, actually, that the Martin Luther King kind of persona that has been basically removed, and I think that's because it has. So I'm going to look at the definitions. So I just did a quick chat GTP search on some definitions, just so we can compare and contrast for our own categorization kind of ideas. And then I know we're just stupid and we should just trust the experts and everything. I get it. That's what they tell us. But I mean, let me just, if I was to do my own research on it, just to try, it's like, okay, we've got the fascist guy. Now we've got the fascist guys. Now, there's different kinds of fascists that started in Italy and all that kind of stuff. But when they're calling you a fascist, they're saying you're like 1930s Germany fast. That's the picture that they're trying to paint on you, right? That's what they're so let's define it. We've got the authoritarian rule, strong central power, usually under a single leader or party with little or no tolerance for political opposition. So we have ultra-nationalism, intense promotion of national unity, often defined in terms of race, ethnicity, or culture, and hostility towards perceived outsiders, suppression of dissent, control of the press and speech, censorship and violent representation of critics and political opponents, militarism and mass mobilization, glorification of military strength, paramilitary groups, and the idea that the nation must stay in the state of struggle and readiness and so on. And then economic or social, state direction of the economy. So it's going to be centralized control is what they want typically. And of course, because it's, you would think it's a power thing. And then cult of a cult leadership kind of situation. So the personality becomes more important than the policy. And then we've got the classic uniform. What do they look like? You've got a military style tunic and jerkins. You got the Sam Brown belt. You've got the breeches. You've got the tall boots. So you've got the boots are the classic part of the whole thing. And then you got the peak caps. You got black shirts, brown shirts, and then dark blues and greens are the typical for the old school kind of thing. Okay, so political and social behavior. Suppressing dissent, shutting down opposition party, jailing or intimidating critics, censoring press and art, propaganda. So we have consistent rallies, parades, posters, and radio speeches to glorify the state and so on, military and daily life, uniforms in school, military drills, persecution of minorities, scapegoating ethnics, religious, or political groups, encouraging discrimination and violence, economic organization behavior, state control is what they typically going to want, centralization of power, and interpersonal. We've got groupthink rituals. You've got chants, salutes, slogans to enforce conformity, silence, doubt. So surveillance state is also going to be part of that. What about the hippie? All right, so let's analyze the hippie. Now, the reason I think of the hippie is because the hippie, at least aesthetically, tried to be away from the fascists. So I think basically what we have here is we had, and I think we had some communist basically propaganda in our schools trying to say that one side of this political spectrum is fascist, the other side is communist, and the middle is the Democratic Republic. So if you're trying to get further away from fascism, you should be a communist, is what that framing would be. We know Hannah Arendt says no, totalitarian is centralization of power is one of the primary components. So I think the hippie aesthetically is as far removed as they can be, and maybe the communal concept of living together kind of works for a small group, I mean, to some degree, but it doesn't scale, which is kind of the problem. So let's just see generally the hippie, right? A hippie was typically a young person who rejected mainstream social norms, especially materialism, conventional dress and grooming, and traditional career and family expectations. Hippies sought personal freedom, communal living, and spiritual and creative exploration, often opposing war. So they're often going to be then no war at any, pacifists. So key cultural elements, peace and love, ideas of nonviolence, harmony, universal love, the slogan, make love, not war, alternative lifestyle, communal living. So we've got a communal living, which kind of leads to the idea of communism when you scale it up. The problem is it doesn't scale properly, just like the family unit doesn't really scale. So that's where it runs into problems politically, in my opinion. So special experimentation, so interest in Eastern religions, Hindi, Buddhism, gets mixed in with, so you get kind of a hodgepodge of different spiritual systems. Psychedelic exploration, you got the LSD, you got the drugs, you got the marijuana, shrooms, artistic expression, music festivals, and so on, and closely tied with anti-war protests. So obviously they're kind of linked to some degree with anti-war kind of ideas. What do they wear? They're wearing their clothing, I think, is where they were most successful at looking least military, right? You got the bell-bottom jeans, you got the tie-dye T-shirt, the fringed leather suede, the long flowered skirts, accessory beads, headbands, round whatever, peace symbols, flowers, and sandals, and so on. All right, so that's the hippie. Political, on the political side, their peace activism, civil rights and environmental causes, alternative economics, so bartering, free stores, and so on. That's where it gets in trouble when they get into politics because, again, it doesn't really scale. interpersonal culture, casual openness. So they're usually open, friendly, peace and loving language is what they would like to at least aspire to, you would think. Nonviolent conflict resolution, so they tend to not like violence personally or on the political side, you would think. So, okay, hippie. Now let's look at the anti-fascist. So it's kind of a loosely termed term, but we're going to loosely define it as anyone who, this is what chat says, anyone who organizes or acts to resist, stop fascist ideologies, groups, or activists. So now we have a whole group here. Obviously, this kind of thing you would think also was a thing when you had fascism in like Italy and Germany and so on but part of the issue possibly with a group like this, especially when you're in peacetime or non, is that it's, if you look at the definition of it, it's not pro anything, it's only anti something. That means that what if you win? There's nothing there other than being defined by the opposing group, right? So that means that the definition's kind of ambiguous because it's dependent upon the other person. They're reacting to the other group and defining their whole movement as anti something instead of for something, in which case you might be against something because you're for something, but you end up with a problem, it seems to me, at least in normal times, if you're identifying with a group that's derived its meaning simply from opposing something as opposed to building something. So you've got direct action. Activists can include nonviolent protests, rallies, counter marches, and so on. And in some cases, I don't know, there could be some cases, more confrontational tactics happen. That seems like kind of a euphemism. More confrontational tactics happen sometimes by people. So political debate. Supporters see it as a necessary defense against authoritarianism. Critics argue some tactics can themselves be confrontational and unlawful, meaning you become the thing possibly that your group is designed not to be, right, or trying to oppose. So let's look at the outfit. You got the all black outfit, black hoodies, black jeans, cargo pants, black jackets to create a uniform, unanimous look. So they're trying to all look the same so they don't get caught by the police and whatnot, which means they look like a military unit. Does it not? And then you got the face coverings, you got masks, scarves, or whatever, canceling identity and protect against pepper spray. So again, there's arming themselves like a military unit, you'd think, because now they got masks and they're arming themselves. So now you've got beanies or hoods for warm anytime and blend in with black clothing. You've got sturdy footwear. So we've got black boots, sneakers, or combat style shoes. So now they got their boots, which again, it seems like a military type of aesthetic on the clothing side of things. You got gloves possibly, sometimes for warm grip or protection from chemical or something like that. Accessories, you got your backpack carrying water, first aid, Google and stuff. So now you've got, seems like a military gear style backpack, instead of, doesn't look like it's got Pokemon on it. Doesn't normally have Pokemon on it or something like. You got your Googles, you got your umbrella used as shields to block cameras. So that's going to be a new thing they didn't have back in the day because no one was so worried about people taking pictures of them as they commit crimes or something, I guess, right? So then you got the handmade protest sign, red and black anti-fascist flags, common symbols. So you got the circle A as a symbol, two flag type of thing. So you've got symbology that looks pretty aggressive, kind of like red slogans. You've got anti-fascist slogans. You've got presentations. The look emphasizes anonymity and solidarity. Everyone dresses similarly, so individuals are harder to identify. Again, that's what a military unit does. So it is tactical rather than fashion, focused, aiming on protecting participants and coordinating visually in a crowd. So the messaging and culture, the use of symbolic art, graffiti, so they use graffiti and paint and whatnot, and they use intimidation tactics possibly, such as doxing, showing up to people's houses, and that kind of thing. Okay, So that's intimidation. Let's look at the constitutional conservative. Now, I'm defining the constitutional conservative as a Christian, but it could be a Judeo-Christian. I would think in the same kind of category, that thinks that the Constitution was built off of Judeo-Christian values, and they believe in the Bill of Rights. So by definition, they believe in the Bill of Rights, that all people have those rights if you're a United States citizen at least, and the underpinnings of the constitutions and the general teachings of the Bible, which you can argue how they're going to interpret that and so on and so forth. But those are the fundamentals. So someone who emphasizes strict adherence to the U.S. Constitution as the supreme law of the land, often favors limited federal government, separation of powers, and protection of individual liberties as written in the founding documents. So they believe in separation of power, not centralization of power, possibly because they believe in the idea that power corrupts, and so the best system is to separate it. So may prefer organizationalist or textual approaches to constitutional interpretation, reading it as closely as possible, meaning they actually have some respect for the wisdom of the people that created the Constitution. They might have some good ideas on checks and balances and why they're necessary, possibly. So Bill of Rights. So if we look at the Bill of Rights in particular, which you would think would coincide with biblical values for the most part, because there's supposed to be inalienable rights given by God to people, bypassing human law to some degree, because they're just natural rights, specifically highlights devotion to the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. So you got freedom of religion, speech and press, rights to bear arms, due process and fair trial, protection from unwarranted search and seizure, state rights and limits on federal power. So notice that some of these things obviously go strictly against what you would think the fascist would be thinking, because the fascist is going to use intimidation and control to obviously manipulate people, as the anti-fascists also seems to be picking up in an argument to take out the fact. But if you're the constitutional person, they're going to say, well, you got freedom of religion and freedom of the press, and then right to bear arms. That doesn't mean right to use them on other citizens, right? But due process and fair trials. So they believe that if you're going to condemn someone, that you have to go through the due process. You can't just intimidate them, or social justice, take them out, or something like that. Protection from unwanted search and seizure. So state rights and limited federal government. So the Christian identities with Christian faith and sees biblical teaching as a guide for personal life and varying degrees of public policy. This can range from broad cultural Christianity to active church, social conservative, holds traditional views on social norms, and so on. All right, so that's the general idea. Everyday clothing, what do they look like? Well, you got business casual, Sunday best. You've got jeans, button downs, patriotic t-shirts, cross necklaces. We've got practical footwear, occasional Western rural looks, dark suits in a formal situation. They might be carrying that good old Constitution, possibly the Bible, common visual symbols, American flag, Christian cross, pro Bill of Rights, and so on. So what's their civil policy? On the public policy, active voting, advocacy, so they actually encourage people to participate, emphasizes constitutional rights. So that's going to be in the Bill of Rights. So obviously that's definitionally what they kind of believe in. Participation in rallies or town halls, because that's where you exercise your ability to speak. Grassroots organizations, religious and community life, religion, family, faith, and so on. Stereotypical lifestyle, traditional social norms, patriotic rituals, and so on. All right, so that's the general idea there. So given those, if we were to categorize these items, again, we're going to say we've got the fascist, and then we've got these two seem like what the mainstream media seems to be putting together as like the same thing. But like if I look at it, it's like it seems to me that these guys, the fascists, came out of a splinter of the Marxist movement, which was post God is dead, right, idea, so that we need to recreate in a scientific way the structure from a top-down system, which didn't work even scientifically. Why? Possibly because they had the wrong mental model in mind, even from a logical standpoint, because they were working with machines like an engine, like a steam engine that would be powered from a central location to organize the whole body. The brain organizes the whole body. But that's not the current systems, even on a scientific way that we think right now, because right now you're looking at decentralized systems that need to be in place for larger spans, like nature, or like the way the brain works, or now you could see it in AI. So even so it seems to me that they're going in for that same strand of not it's not a religious thing. They might use religion as a tool or something like that, but I think they're actually trying to be scientific, and then the scientific thing didn't fail, the veil falls off, and it's just about power, right? And so, which I think those are opposite. Now the hippie, like I say, that you can look at them and say, well, look, the hippie is totally different than the fascist. However, politically, the hippie runs into a problem, and I think this is what actually happened to us, and that is that the hippie wants to believe in commune living, where everybody shares everything, which should coincide, you would think, with communistic ideas, where you're just going to redistribute everything to everyone. But the problem is, if you give all the power to someone to redistribute, then you get a centralization of power. And that's why you get that's why the hippie is actually closer to the fascist, because they're going to end up communist. Communists and fascists, both totalitarian, both centralize the power. If you give the power all to the government, and you say, yeah, I'm giving it to you so that you can equally distribute it to everyone, they're going to say, they're going to laugh in your face and keep all the power. Why? Because they already have it. So human nature, just someone's going to take the power if you put all the power into a central point. So the hippie thing kind of works maybe on a local level, like a family unit can possibly work in a commune situation, but it doesn't scale. And we know that even scientifically. So I would actually say the hippie is closer to the fascist from a political standpoint, although in their personal life, they're kind of as far as and then you've got the anti-fascist, which again, looks a lot like the fascist. Why? It seems like they've identified their whole idea or their whole being on combating fascism, which maybe you can kind of do that in a world where you're clearly, but in peaceful times, that seems like your organization has no actual positive goal, right? So that means that this person's tactics looks like exactly the same as the fascist type, right? They look the same. They got the boots, they got the military dress, they got the masks on. They're going to hide their identity. They're going to go around intimidating people, and so on and so forth. That's so it seems like to me, like what do I have in my clip here? They become the thing that they're trying to stay away from. Like they got the ring of power.
In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen! Not dark, but beautiful and terrible as the dawn! Treacherous is the deed! Stronger than the foundations of the earth! All shall look me and despair!
So that's I think that's generally what happened. Like the general thing here, where if you give all the power to the central area, that seems to be. So to me, I feel it should look more like this. You've got the fascist, and then you've got these two seem to be tactic-wise, dress-wise, political theory-wise, very closely related, right? Because how is the anti-fascist saying they're going to beat they're going to give all the power to the central government? What's that going to result in? Totalitarian, at least somewhere down the line. The hippie looks different than the fascist, so she's managed to get as far away that way. But politically, it's going to wrap around because she's bought into the false notion, in my opinion, that I was taught as well in some places, which is like, fascism's on one side, communism's on the other, and we're somewhere in the middle with a democratic republic. Wrong, right? That's not the way you want to look at it, because both fascism and communism are kind of offshoots of the same thing. They fight each other historically, but that's like saying I'm gonna denounce the Compton Crips by joining the Bloods or something, right? Or I'm gonna denounce the cartels, the Mexican cartels, by joining the mafia. Or they're the same thing, right? They're gonna fight like crazy, but but they're basically they have the same tactics. They're doing kind of like the same thing. That's the same to me. That seems like the same as the communism and the fascism. They both are centralizing the power. And once you do that, it's going to corrupt, and you're going to end up at some point in totalitarian realm. That's what it seems like to me. So the opposite, if you want to get as far away from the fascist as possible, you don't become anti-fascist. That just makes you turn into the thing that you're trying to fight against. You don't become a hippie, because then you're going to try to become communist. What you do is you say, no, we already have that. That's called we've had it since. That's called a democratic republic that has natural laws. That's how you get as far away from the fascist idea as possible. I know I'm not a professional here. I should consult the professionals, but that's my naive interpretation. And then I still think like a Martin Luther King character has been kind of removed, which shouldn't be the case, from the narrative of the mainstream media. And that's because obviously the speeches that he made that resonate so well, in my opinion, are actually are based on biblical values. And he basically made the argument in those speeches that the Constitution's right. The Bill of Rights are correct. They line up to biblical values. It's just that you're not doing that. And then the people said, "You're right. We're not. That we wrote it down. It's written down properly, but you're not doing it. So we have to. So that's what the argument was. But then obviously now they changed the argument and said that they changed the definition. It's no longer equality under the law. They're changing words to like equity under the law and this kind of thing, which leads to weird stuff. I think Thomas Sowell is the person to look at on the detriments to everybody involved with those kind of changes that you can argue. But that's why they kind of abandon. You don't hear Martin Luther King anymore and his major speeches, because they line up to the Constitution. So in my opinion, this guy over here in our current time, if he was living in Martin Luther King time, they'd be on the same page, because their values are derived from the same place, the Bible, which then manifested in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, natural laws. And if Martin Luther King, judging just on his speeches, because I know people try to argue his personal life is different or it changed or this or that. I'm not, just looking at his speeches, you would think that if he was living in the current time period, he would line up basically with these guys, because again, because they're drawing the logic from the same baseline scenario, right? The Bible was used was generated, the Constitution, in essence. Natural rights are generated from basically that idea. Everyone has natural rights, need to have equality under the law. So you would think they'd be on the same page in different time frames, given the different circumstances of the different. That's my interpretation. So the categories are messed up. I still think we have a categorization problem on things. They don't seem right, and I, as is per usual, have the proper categories that people should adhere to, or at least think about. That's what I feel like.